What is up guys, Wraec is here with a new video, and today we got these skills for Infinite Era Alikita. And to be honest, I was very surprised. The thing is, we can see it a little bit, that is actually the entire skill description. And I'm not sure if you can read that right like this, but you can see it's very short. So first time in a long time we actually see a skill description that doesn't look like a book. So yeah, I don't know, will be nice, I guess. I'm not sure, I kind of like long descriptions as well. Sometimes it's a bit convoluted and a bit complicated, but beyond that, this hero is a very short description that will still not be easy to grasp. Like, you can understand the concept, but mastering it will probably be quite difficult because this hero does something pretty insane. Let's check her out. Infinite Era Alikita, Dark Hero, Transcendence Hero. Our next Transcendence Hero actually due to arrive next week on Friday. So basically this Friday, upcoming Friday. And in the past, heroes from the Dark faction that have become Transcendence heroes have been quite strong. I don't know. DH has a bit of a fable to make nice Dark heroes. If you look back on who we had in there, we had LFA, Star Swordsman Mockman, Phantom Defier Elena, and lastly we had Interstellar Hunter Patricia. All of those are basically broken insane. Swordsman Mockman is no longer really meta, but still a super strong hero. And now we get Infinite Era Alikita. And we can drop into her active skill immediately. Deals damage to all enemies and inflicts authority manipulation on them. Afterward, deals extra damage and increases the extra damage dealt according to the number of debuffs owned by the targets. So a bit like DGN, also dealing extra damage based on debuffs. DGN deals a ton of damage, so that's actually quite promising for her. Authority manipulation converts attribute buffs owned into corresponding attribute reductions. And at this point, I know I either talked about this or I wrote an answer to a comment on my video about exactly this concept. I don't know where it was. If any of you guys remembers, please tell me down in the comments, because I know I talked about this. And that is like really a hero that I thought would be very cool. And we will talk about the reason. I think that in a second. Let's talk more about the mechanics first. So I think this authority manipulation doesn't convert all of the attribute buffs into debuffs at the same time. I think it will be limited in terms of stack size, maybe. The question really is, will it convert an entire stack of buffs? Like if you have 16 attack buffs, will it convert 16 attack buffs to be debuffs? Or will it just take, like, let's say 1 or 2 or 3 and make them debuffs? So that will be a difference, I guess. And then, of course, the question is, how many layers of authority manipulation do you inflict? Because we don't see that here yet. And then, well, we will see what is in the sublimations as well, because all those are not included yet. If we have something like authority manipulation in the DT skills as well, that might be quite insane. Pretty short skill, but really there's a lot behind this authority manipulation, because what it essentially forces your enemy to do is to reconsider which buffs he gains. Sometimes gaining a very strong buff can be bad now. If you, for example, gain a 50% damage reduction buff, and this gets converted to a negative or to an attribute debuff, suddenly you have a 50% attribute, 50% damage reduction debuff on you, which you really don't want. Same for something like all damage reduction or a huge attack buff. That can backfire immensely. And that will kind of dictate which heroes you want to use on your team. Because some heroes can backfire a lot now, actually. On the other end, we have to say, it kind of plays into a meta that already exists and supercharges it in a way, because we already have a debuff meta. You have to basically fight debuffs in the endgame, because with all of the Destiny Transition 6 heroes, we now face the problem that really you kind of sometimes run out of attack. If you don't remove your attribute debuffs, you can pretty easily, with the DGN and some heroes like BQA, for example, reduce the enemy attack to 0 on all of his heroes. And if you don't run an attribute reduction purifier at that point, you are in a bit of a peril. So having that now and even converting your buffs to debuffs now, That might be quite insane, but we'll see. So, basic attack. Attacks all enemies and inflicts data destruction. Randomly inflicts one of the following effects: attack reduction, damage reduction, decrease, speed reduction, energy reduction, armor reduction, crit damage reduction. So, one thing to note, we'll see if that is really the limit of it, because we have all damage reduction or all damage in the game. And the question really is, we never see that as a symbol. So will she interact with that or will she not interact with that? A lot of those things, though, are pretty interesting. Speed reduction, very, very nice. Energy reduction is quite insane. If she can reduce a ton of energy, it would be pretty cool. And crit and everything. So very, very nice, actually. And we will have to see how much she really inflicts, how big the values are. It's like 10% attack reduction or something. How many layers does she inflict? We'll have to wait for all of that. But in general, this seems like a pretty good basic skill. One counter that I see here, she deals damage to all enemies with basically both of her attacks. So if you run SQH, she will always hit her. And she will trigger a bunch of counter attacks. And my current team actually revolves a bit around that. So you have SQH on there, I have Gagi on there, I have DGN on there. So she would trigger all of those effects, all of those counter effects, which can be a bit of a negative point actually. Then we have this: at the end of each round transfers 3 debuffs from allies to self and grants self structure inversion. So she actually can convert her attribute reduction owned into corresponding attribute buffs, which is really, really nice. So now not only does she have an attribute reduction removal effect, so basically she grants big purify to your entire team, but she can also really profit from that. And that can also be quite interesting. One thing to note, the Star Expedition boss actually reduces a ton of attack. And let's check this out. I actually forgot that we don't have the new boss yet in game, but I found the picture, so nonetheless we can check out the skills. First of all, we have this. This is a passive skill, reduces the attack of the highest enemy by 40%. So we have a 40% debuff there, which is quite insane. And basically she could take that debuff away and make that a buff for herself. So quite fancy on that. And the other one that we had is actually this one. That's the active skill. And here we have 5% attack skill from all of the allies, which also means she could take that, and also she would gain a ton of armor because that's 100% armor reduction. And she could basically take all of that as well. So kind of fancy, I guess. Pretty good passive skill. Really love it, to be honest. It's a very beautiful design. Then we have Wipeout. When being killed, inflicts authority manipulation and curse of decay on all enemies, and grants all allies structure inversion, increasing damage dealt by allies on targets with attribute reduction. Structure inversion, we saw that converts attribute reductions owned into corresponding attribute buffs. It's interesting. We will see if that is a one-time effect, if this is like a full attribute reduction clear. So basically she dies and all of your attribute reductions become attribute buffs. Would be quite cool, actually. Maybe even make it possible to run a bit of a suicide hero and have a major impact in like round 3, 4 or something. If she dies there, that could be quite insane. Curse of Decay is the effect that Forces actually has. So a layer that is on the enemy, it's mark, and negates the next attribute effect that the hero is supposed to gain, and then deals damage to the target. Quite cool, actually. Quite the good passive skill. An on-kill passive skill is usually not quite that nice, I have to say. Because oftentimes, I mean, you don't really want your heroes to die, especially if it's not something like LDA that will return to the battlefield. So dying is not a very nice condition. Taking damage is nice because it's easier to fulfill. Dying is a one-time thing. It's, yeah, not that nice that she has a passive that is essentially, I don't want to say wasted, because it can be very good. We will have to see about that. But hard to fulfill conditions on that. So, Core of Origin. When an ally releases an active skill or basic attack, the owner has a chance to inflict authority manipulation. We saw that before. And when an enemy releases active skill or basic attack, the owner has a chance of granting structure inversion of allies and increasing allies' damage dealt to targets with attribute reduction. This core seems really, really nice. It seems like a bit of these of the Jara core but for attribute reduction. Authority manipulation, that was the skill that we saw here, converts attribute buffs owned into corresponding attribute reductions. So that is inflicted on the enemy, so we remove buffs from them. And when an enemy attacks us, we actually remove debuffs and gain buffs instead of that. And at the same time, deal more damage to enemies with attribute reduction. So, I mean, the obvious combination of her now is combining her with DGN. DGN is quite nice. DGN can backfire a little bit if the enemy also runs Alikita, because, well, DGN also grants your team a ton of buffs, and those can of course be converted then, which might be a bit bad, but on the other end, you can spread all of the debuffs there on the enemy, and that can be quite insane. So, also kind of promising. I wonder if she can do some decent damage in PvE, and if there will actually be teams built around her for Star Expedition, because there is a bit of a chance for that, I guess. If the damage is increased a lot that you deal to enemies with attribute reductions, and you can stack a ton of attribute reductions, this might be interesting. Then again, we have the similar effect on DGN, and that doesn't seem to scale with stack size, but only with different attribute reductions. So like, you have energy reduction, you have armor reduction, you have all of that. So for every single stack, basically, not for every single effect on that stack. Yeah, so what do I think about the hero? I think she will be very insane. The one thing we'll have to check out is really who to combine her with, and who you really don't want to combine her with. Because now some heroes, I mean, you don't necessarily want them on your team, or they harbor a bit of a risk when you have them on your team. I'll give you a bit of an example right here. The example for is Mystic Fairy Freya, really, because we have this effect when any ally releases basic attacks or active skills, increase their all damage reduction by 12% and attack by 12%, and also precision. So Mystic Fairy Freya basically alone gives your enemy the opportunity to reduce your all damage reduction, if that works, and reduce your attack and reduce your precision. So most of the most important stats can now be targeted if you run Mystic Fairy Freya, which is risky, I guess. If the all damage reduction can't be targeted, it's less of a risk, because then it's only attack and precision. Okay, I mean, it's not great, but other heroes give attack buffs too. And then, of course, we have to see what you do in terms of DT, because DT in itself also often grants buffs. There are some buffs here. We have a 100 speed buff at the end, which I often like to use. And maybe this is too big of a risk, because gaining 100 speed is very nice. Getting 100 speed removed and then having that on your team as a spreadable debuff, that can be very, very risky. So in that sense, we will have to check that out. I really like the hero. I really want to have an S tier. But there are none. Would be so nice to have one. But yeah. That being said, tell me down in the comments what you think about this hero. And with that, I wish you a great day. Thank you for 200 subscribers, by the way. And we'll see us in the next one.